Today's panelists include Kelly Snide, Rusty Lamb, Ted Ferber, and Bobby Brown, and I'd like to go ahead and let them introduce themselves a little bit.
My name is Kelly Snide. I work for Shazy Orchard in the Champlain Valley. Our orchard consists of right around 800 acres. We are trying to do a new system that will benefit us in supporting our trees and crop load.
All right, how about Rusty?
All right, I'm Rusty from Yonder Fruit Farms, based out of Glacier, New York, which is the northern end of the Hudson Valley. We've got around 500 acres of tree fruit, mostly apples. It's not all high density, but where everything's heading that direction. So got quite a bit of experience with successes and failures on trellising.
My name is Ted Ferber from Cherry Lawn Farms in Sodus, and we're about 300 acres of fruit, mostly apples. We have an on-farm storage, and we're similar in that we've been putting in trellis systems, and we still have some large trees in the ground too, but converting that acreage over time.
All right, and Bobby?
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Robert Brown at Orchardale. We're out in Waterport, New York. We have adopted mostly a fruit wall in the last few years. It's probably 10 years ago we started planting tall spindle, and we've tightened it up a little bit since then. It's somewhat between a super and a tall, if you got specific. And we look forward to talking about that more today. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you all. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and start in on that first question that we have. So if you all could describe your current trellis design and construction process and tell us a little bit about the materials you're using, and as much as you're willing to give us a little sense of what your per acre costs are on those systems. Why don't we go ahead and kick it off with Ted?
Okay, so we are using 12-foot long by 5-inch diameter lodge pine posts. We are spacing them 35 feet apart within the row. We're putting them in the ground 32 inches. Our row spacing at this point is 11 feet with a 2.5 feet spacing in between the trees. We're using, our system's evolved over the last few years, but we think we're settling in on a 3-wire trellis, where the bottom wire is 5 feet off the ground, the next wire is 7 feet, and the last wire is 9 feet. We have been using fiberglass rods for vertical support, but this year we're going to move to a 12 or 14 gauge wire that would run from the bottom wire to the top wire, with a pigtail left over on the top, so that we can use that for a permanent tie for the tree when it gets up there. And then to fasten the trees to the wire, we're using a permanent a wire loop, and the tree runs through that. We're weaving the wires down through the row from one side of one post to the other side of the other post, because we've had a couple failures in 2019 where a staple pulled, and then it was a domino effect down the road. We lost a couple rows in 2019. So that's pretty much the system that we have. The costs that we came up with for the labor and the materials to build the trellis, we're coming up with about $4,100 an acre. That includes the labor and all the supplies and some costs for running the plate tamper.
All right, great, thanks. Rusty, do you want to tell us about your current system?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think we're building a pretty similar trellis. 2020, though, we started to try some taller posts, 14-foot poles with a 12-foot row spacing. I put the line poles in 3 feet in the ground. I try to get the end posts in 4 feet. Not possible on all the farms, but where possible, we do that. We build an H brace. The end trees are fully supported. You don't have those trees at the end that are constantly leaning. We use the vertical wire, a 12 gauge wire from the top all the way to the bottom, like Ted mentioned, to support the tree. That's been working really well. And I use 4 wires, one wire at the ground. We have a 5.5 foot wire, which I lowered. I used to run it higher, but now I got it at 5.5 feet. One kind of maybe around 8 feet, 9 feet, and then one up there 11 foot for our taller trellises. And that's been working really well. We do weave the wires, just like Ted said, switching the side of the post as you go from post to post and making sure the wire below it is opposite. So you always have everything locked together. Other than that, it's very similar to how Ted's doing it. I think that's a price estimate I think is probably right on for a 12-foot pole. I think to go up a little bit taller, it's going to cost you a little bit more money. I'm pricing some concrete poles. Well, I have them ordered for 2021, and I think they're going to run maybe, top of my head, maybe around 5,000 for materials, but they're going to be a 15-foot post. So I'm going to be able to put pretty far in the ground and still maintain that 11, 12-foot top wire height.
Okay, great. Kelly, do you want to tell us a little bit about your system?
Yeah, sure. Our current trellis system design is called the H-brace system. We started using this design in 2018. Entitles 2 vertical posts approximately 10 feet apart. They are 42 inches in the ground with 10'6" out of the ground. A horizontal post 6 feet in height off the ground. The horizontal post is attached to the vertical post using metal pins and locking the post together using high tension wire U12 gauge with gripples. The H system used at each end of the row. The inline posts are kept at 25 foot apart for added strength. All of our posts that we use are 5 to 6 inches in diameter and 14 feet in height. We use a vibrating pole pounder to get them in the ground. And of course, here in the Champlain Valley, our ground is very rocky. So sometimes we have to use a mini excavator to get them in the ground. With this system, we use 5 wires. The first wire being a foot off the ground, which we put our irrigation on. The rest of the wires are 2 feet above that each. So it being 1 foot, 3 foot, 5, 7, and 9. For tree support, we use a pre-made vertical wire with wire clips that lock the supporting wire to the horizontal wires. With these clips, it allows the tree to grow freely, but also keep it controlled growing vertically. Once these trees are big enough to support themselves, the clips stay there, but the vertical wires can be moved to be reused on new plantings. So basic material used, we use approximately 150 14-foot post, probably 10-foot post, 4,000 feet of wire, 1,450 vertical support wires, 7,250 support clips, box of staples, gripples, and 3,800 feet of irrigation, and with 1,450 trees per acre. So roughly total cost is between 20 and 25,000 an acre.
That's including the trees. That's
Yes,
including
it
the
is.
trees.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. So next we'll move on to Bobby.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Our current design is just a vertical 6-wire system. The bracing is an angled brace system. We like to get as close to our equilateral triangle as possible, but some of our construction guys have challenged that a little bit, and I kind of like it. We take on more of a 65-degree angle versus more of just a 60 to get that end a little bit taller. And then our anchor is just a larger post, about 4 feet in the ground. Oh, we use a vertical string actually on most of the top half of the trellis. If we do have a small tree here or there, we will put a drop down for those trees that are in need. Our costs are very similar. I think with irrigation tubing, we might be 4,500, something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so next we're going to move on to our next question. What led you to decide on using the current support system that you have now?
So we like this system because we can pass through the rows easier because we're harvesting 3 or 4 rows at a time usually. And it's also our vertical supports change quite a bit as our tree spacing, like Bobby talks about, as our tree spacing is tightened up from 4 feet to 2.5, and the conduit price, kept kind of inching up there. It just got to be too pricey. So that's why we've gone from the conduit to a fiberglass, and now we're gonna use this wire. We are growing our own trees, and we're going to do the grow through style, so the trees should be pretty hefty, and be able to attach to the bottom wire without any other support below that 5-foot wire.
All right, thank you. Rusty, you want to tackle this question?
Yeah. So I think we took a similar path as Ted there. We used to use a lot of conduit and single wire support, and of course conduit got expensive. So then we transitioned to using about 4 wires, the first wire being at waist height and then going up. But we quickly realized it just makes management in the orchard too difficult. Even the first couple of years you're not picking, you might do some tree training or whatever, you're out in the orchard, you can't cross the rows, and you start to get into the harvest, and it's just a nightmare. So I think around 2015 was the first block I put in with the vertical stabilizer wire, and I will never go away from that again. I double staple every wire too for the price of one extra staple. That bottom wire, they put one staple in, but all the other wires are double stapled and weaved, because it's such a cheap thing to do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rusty. Kelly.
Okay, I mentioned one more. I think I got
sure
that.
thing.
One last of the decision is to use the H brace. I think I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again, is to keep those trees at the end of the row fully supported, because if you do a proper triangular brace, you've got to leave a pretty long end where you're either going to have trees that aren't fully supported or you're going to have wasted ground. But with that H brace, you can plant trees right to the very end of the row and have 100% support system on there. That brace wire should be, I think, 26 or 27 degrees, depending who you ask. So you need to make sure you're building your brace long enough relative to the height of your wires. If you go shorter, it's going to have a tendency to pull out of the ground. And I think a lot of that's going to come into play on how long your rows are. If you've got 1,000-foot rows, you're going to be at a higher risk of that happening than if you keep your rows to 400 feet or something like that. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rusty. While we're still talking about the benefits of the H brace, Kelly, do you want to tackle this question next?
Absolutely. So the H brace system and using the 5 wires, I think will give us what we're looking for, which is to hold up a good crop load, even on a good heavy year would be what we're looking for. And of course, with the added weight, we use, like probably a lot of other people out there are using the hail nets now. So with the weight of the hail nets and with the wind added to that, I'm hoping the H brace system will hold up a little bit better than our other system, which was the end post on an angle, and we used to use the 4-foot auger anchors. And like I said before, with our ground here is so stony that we couldn't able to get them all the way in. So it's over time, and the frost would push them a little bit each year, then it'd start to go the other way. And with the hail netting and the wind, it just wasn't holding up. So on the new system too, all our inline posts are drilled through the center, and our wires are through the center of the post and not stapled. And so on the end of each row, they're wrapped, like we do like 4 wraps and then staple those, double staple it.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Kelly. Bobby.
Okay, thanks, Michael. In our goal to establish fruit walls, we can't have trees hanging or unsupported in a way that they're not vertical, because that will limit us on technology and the yield and equipment down the road. So we've really, wires cheap. Wires, like for 6 wires, it's just shy of 500 an acre. So we've really gone, when in doubt, we've just added a wire. And then lately we've got into this vertical support. Vertical supports fits well into this system. And again, that's more just a simplicity thing. We've played with string, we've played with conduit, we've played with drop down wires, and I think that's something any farm can figure out what works best there. But just like you got to keep the tree from tipping over, I think the vertical support also keeps the tree steady so it can grow and get to the top as soon as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe we can start talking about what types of changes did you need to implement to your system?
Well, our present system isn't a lot different than what we've been using in the past, so we really didn't have to adapt, much of anything. But the row spacing has tightened up over time and stuff because we're anticipating either, some type of robotic technology or harvest platform similar to what Lamont are using, the Bin Bandit. They're getting that vacuum thing adapted. So we're kind of keeping our eye on that. And with those things in mind, it's what we've designed the system for.
Okay, great. Thanks. Russ, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll comment on that quickly. It's been a gradual change. So equipment wise, not a lot has changed other than adding more and more platforms. It seems like every year or two we're getting another platform, or we run quite a few. It's a Phil Brown platform now on top of one of our Bin Bandits. And that's a pretty nice setup. And we've got some of the Bin Bandit platforms, and we've got some Phil Brown self-propelled platforms. But that, if you're going to build trellises, especially once you start putting that vertical wire on, I mean, it's you got to have the platform. It doesn't take a lot of acreage, I don't think, to return that investment, to really get the. You're going to save money on the construction cost, but I think also I found you're a lot more timely in keeping that vertical the vertical growth of the tree tied, and keeping it tied, and by maintaining the leader support, you're going to get much faster canopy establishment.
Thank you. Kelly, can you tell us about the changes you needed to make?
Yeah, the change, we actually made quite a few changes. We went from 12-foot posts to 14, so that made us get a different pole pounder. So that was one of a big cost for us. We moved from 14-foot rows down to 12, so that puts you at a different mower size. So there's a lot of changes in just moving 2 feet. It makes a big difference. Of course, we added more posts, more wires. So with that, it's going to bring you more labor, more guys.
Sure. Bobby, do you want to address this question?
Sure. We've continued to further educate our employees, and that has helped us become more precise. As we're all doing, we're all growing, and I think the more acres or the more growth, you've got to be as on target as possible, and to mitigate the risk of trellises failing, etc. Planting with GPS, maybe that's a big change we did. We're finding somebody to work with to get everything straight.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
So now I'm going to switch over to our other question. What are the benefits and limitations of your system? And I think we touched on this a little bit already, but if anybody wanted to add a little bit more detail in on this.
From the benefit, try to ask yourself, can you go higher and why? Can you go narrow and why? What you need to do?
We could go to 14-foot posts. What our hope was is that we've got a 9-foot wire. So we would, we're hoping to get the tree past that wire, a foot and a half, so we got a 10 or 11 foot tall tree, to maximize our yield. So that's, and we didn't go with the 14-foot post. We didn't want to spend the money. So we're trying to, to balance that a little bit. If the trees are growing well, I think, we've got other systems where they have grown past the conduit pole actually, and it's supporting itself, once it got old enough. So that's our thoughts on the height of it. Narrower, well, 10 foot, if we have a lot of hilly ground. So if I was all flat, I'd go 10 feet, but we're not flat enough for that. We got to allow for some drift. So that's why we're at 11 feet.
Sure. Definitely. Thanks, Ted. Rusty, can I ask you that same question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I covered a lot of it, and the benefits of the system we have is the ability to move through the canopy. By having the vertical wires and not losing those trees on the end is the reason why we use the H brace. Limitations, we'll see. We'll see if the H brace is as strong as a properly constructed triangle. I'm not sure if it is. Time will tell.
Sure. Thank you. Kelly, same question.
Yeah, I think most of all, I think getting more trees per acre in the ground, going narrower, it's a big thing. And with a 5-wire system, you just have better support. With the H-spray system, I find it's much easier to maintain and repair, but it's more about bushels per acre. I think you got to pack it all in there and get as much as you can, and still have a great, a good system and hold it up. You can have all the apples in the world, but if you can't hold it up, it's no sense having it. You're wasting your money. And I think for limitations, I mean, of course, we had 14-foot rows before, and we'd put bends in the rows, and we were able to get by the bend with our tractor and 3-point to pull out full ones. Well, we went down to 12-foot, and we can't do that now. So now we have to find a different strategy of how we want to pick that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly. Bobby, same question.
So one of the biggest benefits is I see from the investment is it installs fairly quickly. We put our poles in, we put our wire in, when we can clip it, our trees are supported. Time, money, labor, whatever. Limitations, it has a few weaknesses. The way we do it, if the wind comes out of the east, for example, it could be a weakness. Another limitation we have with the 6 wires is with a multi-pick variety, we can't crawl through or pick the outside of the tree. So that just has a limitation there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now we'll head on to the last question. And just sort of big picture, with the experience that you all have, any final thoughts or recommendations to growers that have experienced trellis failure in the recent past?
Yeah, I don't really have any advice other than we're building this system with not having a trellis failure in mind. If you lose 150 trees in a row, one row of 150 trees, that's about a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 loss right there, because you got to buy the trees, and that's only counting buying the trees and the lost income from what you're not going to be producing there now. It doesn't include having to put them in, and get the support system back up there. You got to weed spray it separately. It's a nightmare.
All right, thank you. Rusty, any final words of advice?
Yeah, like you said, the cost of failure is so high. I would recommend growers not to cut any corners. If you think you need to go at 30 feet between your poles, go 25. I mean, I'm doing around 30 feet, but just one extra pole per row. If that keeps your trellis up or gives you peace of mind at night, do it, because one staple or 2 staples, put 2. If you can't decide if you want 3 or 4 wires, put 4 wires, because all those things are relatively cheap compared to the whole cost of the whole system, and especially the cost of failure. The other thing, I have some pictures, maybe you'll see them, is don't ever staple your wires to the top of the poles. Those will always come out. Always open to the side grain, and like we mentioned, ideally you turn them on a little bit. And always terminate your wires at the end of the poles. Don't go around the pole through a staple and back down the ground. I've seen that done, but that always fails as well. And again, on just using a little bit extra, I use 2 grimples to secure the wire at the end. They're just under $1 a piece.
All right, great. Thanks. Great advice, Rusty. Kelly, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to plan on doing a new trellis system or a new design, I recommend doing some research first. Do what's best for your orchard, because what's good for your orchard may not be best for your neighbor's orchard, and vice versa. And it depends how much you want to change. I mean, if you want to change equipment, those things you got to keep in mind, I think. But the big question is how much do you want to spend per acre? I mean, that's probably your big, which stops a lot of people from doing that. But I mean, if you plan on fixing your own trellis system, I'd throw some extra money at your poles, like Rusty was saying, and maybe a few extra wires and your support system on the end, your anchors. That's what's going to save you.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And Bobby, any final words of advice from you?
Well, you've got to research your investment. You've got to make sure you do a good job installing it. And then I would recommend, lastly, that you dedicate some people and just pick out some times of the year. Go through 2 or 3 times a year through every block, and just as simple as a UTV and a ride through can pay us some huge dividends. So that grower's shadow is always a big one.